An indulgence, if you'll grant me it. Talking about the fog of emulation, that moment working with the Internet Archive when I have to add a whole family of machines, usually because we discovered a capability or an improvement to the emulators, and therefore the opportunity presents itself to add not just one, but a few dozen new machines. In that moment, all the little indignities, the little shortcuts, the strangeness, the uniqueness of what this whole process is, really dawns on me. So I thought I'd take a moment just to share what exactly that is like. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Jeff Atwood, Daniel Boyd, and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. The family of machines that I'm working with right now are calculators, Texas Instruments, Hewlett-Packard, and a few other also-rans that are covered by the MAME emulator. Now, these have been supported by MAME for many years, for most of them north of a decade. Once MAME moved to a more generalized emulation system, calculators were a breeze. They added as many models as they could pull apart, so there's a mass of support. It just never occurred to me to put it up on the archive. We had done handheld history, like the Speak and Spell, or the LCD games that were very popular in the 1980s, but calculators, well, I just let them go. But in a conversation, the question came up as to why we didn't have them on the Internet Archive. And the answer was simple. I'd never thought about them. I wasn't a calculator person. I wasn't somebody who paid hundreds of dollars for these unique models and then used them to do graphing or calculations worthy of an engineer. I was not, and continue not to be, a math person. I said, sure, let's add one. Let's see how hard it is. It turned out it wasn't hard at all, as long as you were me. That's what I'm really talking about here. The process by which we added emulation to the Internet Archive is needlessly complicated, reflecting the fact that it's an additive, an external foreign set of code put into the Internet Archive code base facing outwardly in a way that almost nothing else does. Going through the process of doing this one calculator, I announced it, and the responses were immediate. Joy, memories, and then demands. Demands for other models, demands to have features added, and so I quickly turned around and started spending a few hours adding even more models. To do that properly takes something that I'm not going to call a skill set, but instead an awareness of all the ways things get tripped up, confused, and odd, making MAME, this massive emulator, run at the archive. Let's start simply. There's 3 items at the Internet Archive from which all the emulators pull. Emularity Engine version 1, Emularity BIOS version 1, and Emularity Config version 1. Config version 1 is the simplest. It's a bunch of empty files with the name of the emulation system in them. Let's not talk about that one further. But the other 2 get complicated very quickly. You see, MAME is filled with what are called BIOS files and ROM files. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're not. If you're going to have something which is self-contained, an arcade machine, for example, every single programmable file that would be attached is immutable. You don't load software into most arcade games. So you have Pac-Man and a file called pacman.zip. Pacman.zip are the chips right off the Pac-Man arcade board. That's it. You don't add anything else. But compare that to an Atari 800 which has its own zip file for its internal ROM chips, and then additional files for the floppy disks, cartridges, and cassettes that the Atari 800 took. You can see how that gets a little confusing. On top of that is the problem that while we've got a fully functioning MAME program, there are all these tricks that were put into place to fool it into thinking the virtual system inside your browser is a real file system. It actually creates a small directory called emulator, and inside of emulator is a sort of simulacrum of the MAME expected file system. In theory, all of the additional files that MAME has, like artwork, cabinet drawings, and so on, could be put in there along with the ROM chips. And before you ask me what artwork means in this particular context, I'll say it's the artwork that represents the physicality of an item, where the screen is only a small part of what's being rendered. Think of a calculator with its small LCD screen. That's all that MAME emulates. It just works on a very, very tiny patch of video data. But anybody who uses it will quickly be unhappy because they can't see the names of the buttons, the interrelation of the controls. So some time ago, MAME created the artwork directory, where a specialized custom format of artwork and layout allowed keys and the pressing of graphics to sort of look like you were using a version of the machine rendered on the screen. Therefore, the buttons, the power switch, and the sliders of a machine could be seen on the screen. Where do we configure this? Where is this all put? Well, there's a JSON file, whatever the name of the emulator is, .json, and in there are a whole bunch of directives involving resolution, controls, what sort of program is run in JavaScript and WebAssembly to make the emulator run, along with any other specialized command lines that are put into the evocation of the emulator. Maybe every time we want the emulator to run, we want it to run at twice the scale. You can do that. Maybe every time we run the emulator, it's in a certain mode when it starts. This is also done there. These JSON files were hacked together over the course of years, trying to make machines run like they should. Whenever I would add a new set of arcade machines, I usually found myself writing customized one-off scripts to generate these complicated JSON files, as well as putting the BIOS ROMs into the right place, touching an empty CFG file, and then hoping that it would all run. I'd usually have a second machine running and playing these into a screenshotter so I could see which ones made the grade and which ones failed. When I was adding 30 or 40 of these, that helped a lot. I'm sure you're getting the impression. What a janky mess. Oh yes, I take no apologies for the fact that this thing is a hack. A bodged set of best practices derived from random experimentation, discussion, and then just hoping that what we threw at the wall might stick. Making it even worse, this particular installation only exists at the Internet Archive. The Emularity program is open source, and people have taken it and made their own sites, maybe a couple dozen. But they've usually gone in and added their own conveniences to make it make more sense. We don't have that. I have no Stack Exchange or FAQ to go to figure out how it's all working. I'm the only one doing it. I'm the only one with the access to be able to make these changes. Working with collaborators like James Bekoyanu and Dan Brooks and Dopefish, I've been able to make it all work. But when I get to the top, when I look back at what's set up and how I did it, it's never, ever satisfying. It's definitely the case that it's beautiful to watch a machine that wasn't previously emulated at the Internet Archive come alive, become bootable. Being able to share that with people and watching the flood of memories and nostalgia and excitement come when that machine becomes available. But when I look at how these configuration files came together, and especially when I put a 5 instead of a 7, or forget to change all of the different settings in a template file that I was using, it's incredibly frustrating to know that beyond me, beyond my own working in this environment, it'll be a Herculean task for somebody to ground up understand what's going on here. Even if I write out some documentation, they will be the scribblings of a madman, the clumped together memories of what I did at various points, along with a lot of unintended, undocumented gotcha that through the years have become so innate to me that I don't even recognize them as the unwritten assumptions that they are. This is the magic and the tragedy of this situation. I would be more frustrated, I think, if it wasn't for the fact that at the end of the day, once this is all running, once the minor mistakes and hidden choices and weird decisions are all put to bed, if there wasn't this beautiful, accessible, universally aware collection of old historical machines and software being brought alive for people who might not have thought about one of these calculators for years are suddenly reliving their high school years, their college years, remembering the work they did, what it consisted of, and as their minds unlock their own hidden memories and their own shortcuts and unspoken truths, maybe it just doesn't matter if what got them to that place was such a tangled, bizarre, one-off set of promises put together by somebody who never knew he was signing up for this kind of job, and who, after tying off the mess, simply smiled and walked away. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, thanks to James Bekoyanu, Mark Pilgrim, Ernie Hershey, Michael Rubin, Craig Talbert, Dilip Reddy, Sean Kelly, Trixie the Cat, Martin, Symbionts, and Anonymous, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. You can visit the collection of calculators at Calculator Drawer, archive.org/details/calculator drawer. It has Texas Instruments, Hewlett-Packard, and a few other toy calculators that came in along the way. It was weird working on all this. It's been quite some time since I've had to update entire families of emulators, and while it may seem like I'm complaining about this situation, it's more a recognition that out there are all sorts of solutions, which, given the scrutiny of others, may come off as a hastily assembled tangle. I think that exists more than we like to talk about. I think people want to believe that the engineering and the foundations of what puts us where we are were decisions that were made after long consultation and considering all the options. If you come anywhere near this sort of life, you know that sometimes when the circuit connects like it should and everything is turned on, it is maybe sometimes best to just hold your hands up, back away, and close the door quietly.